sa tribunal nsem ya nkomo na ne yedi anope yansa na woba na dom kuma ne kire se court of share chese enfum so nko amino nyafo nyima do ntwi kasa no pe chese niema hyedan ko se de se ko no enti won de ne se aban no twen san kora nya de betu ti sifo so aye press conference enra mo mo so akasa de afon se sa de na wo sa ewo mu a enu nti gidi se niema ti sa na ko so se eyemra under the military rule no ye ne yenko ye bra democratic dispensation so a eno so ye ne yenko eti no said na tribunal ne tie ewo soja fo amamuo mu no sa pepepe na betena ewo sesi ade kama mka bi eye adwuma ya na
jamida se yencha ahwefo no pay eja nkomo we madwen ho and I think say is perhaps nkoma ya din na mizu say we one of the nkoma hu hia pa ni baako for a couple of reasons. I think say yina ejitum say democracy no judiciary na ekosi because say ja me no nya adwa me because me wo kwan say me dey asem ne court nti me mfa sekan and I say me no nyina abonten entoto atwede so judiciary becomes because a referee or making sure say this game of democracy is played in a way obia wojidi tanye bia ball no a ebo no say ne besi akobia no referee say bi obebu atenten ni etimfimfini nti yemfa branch ensa obia anya de ope and because this impact is seeking to practically reform, and my emphasis is on practically reform the judiciary. I've listened to the minority, I've listened to the majority. There are layers to it. You see, majority is right when they say Emrano has always been in our constitution. It said yes, Emrafufrobia no ye. It's a living shell Sebio in 2002 when NPP came to power, tried to subdue. Basically, in 2002 there was an attempt not to use a tribunal. But other than that, the argument of the majority to say, but tribunals, your constitution has always provided the shells for it. Inti Eban is saying seeking to implement their own constitution, and I think they are right in that sense. That Sebi Emra Kunini 1992 constitution has in its frame. In that sense, seeking to implement something that is already in the constitution, however you see it, cannot be faulted because your constitutional architecture already provides that shell.
Okay.
So that's sort of the first point. But the other question is, the fact that it's in our constitution and there were attempts made to say a bit yes in chain 2002 no means that we shouldn't use it anymore. My point is until the constitution is changed, and Makunin Mahokwain said tribunals are a functional part of our judiciary. But the practical question is, why has tribunals never been used, or not never? Why were they not used as the constitution intended it to be? And I think that is where the minority has a very, very, very valid conversations around. Tribunals came through in 1982, PNDC law 24, which introduced in Ghana's judiciary a tribunal system. Sebi, but the people who lived through that, internet TV so the legitimation will be an experience of tribunal.
Yeah, we dey me twa no maso ma atwa so na yensaka lawyer Kwaku Ansasare wa homa no so. Nti nu komo briefly na mensambra bio. Nti we dey me da papa no womre. Akwara me na wachi o.
Yeah, me go so ndi dey.
Me bare.
So yet.
Me Barrio. Obey the was a partner woman on the pay. You, me patcho, what did Sabina some semia whom common a year dear. Minority says she say be and from so be womb. Don't catch an so say a Sababa Boama at entry near to me, I a Jumana and Tamoso. Wadama, will be our being a war embremu, such a bin and semi, what you show who any day away.
You mean that embremu, dear, a lawyer be a being one embremu, dear, and you're one lawyer be a lawyer. My thing is, women say, tribunal. And yet, and tribunal no pagana tribunal there is visited. Now, public tribunal as a concept there. And the era running the preso, and or the tribunal you neno and the era running that by example military tribunal, answer military tribunal, and the tribunal there is any atra fine. Now, media under 92 Constitution, now community and circuit court tribunal. Now, no Constitution, Juma, 7 January 1993, no. Kosu kakra Chief Justice Georgina Wood Mresono. One who sena tribunal no. Sebe Yenisika Edibe sustain public district or community tribunal second community no homo amende Court Act, no, Article 126, 1B, Parliament, Constitution, no, Parliament, ultimately establishing lower court, such lower court, as Parliament may by law establish, such lower court. And this Parliament consider bill, establishing such lower court. Now, any council, one more any council so because tribunal no normally woman enye nomna yina ya said yenye chikakra yehu normal tribunal no ye no etumi kasetia pesa no ba omo sanbeye dia na empata na no nkyere se emra ma ho kwan nti the bill has legality in the Constitution. And it said Article 125, Clause 2. Emma Hukwain said, Obiara Biara of friend who not Jenny who just saw a gun, you know. As it's all participating in the administration of justice. And Oman Cassette, that citizen participation, you know, it will be through tribunals. And the Constitution, you know, I am the we the people of Ghana, and the Constitution, the tribunal, and this will be considered tribunal, no, and Tiamra, Namum, so a bribia as I said, yes, son, a deba, Samriana, Ewoyan Tibia, you know, Anna, no man could you or Tika Sem Afem. And the aesthetic asema femu dia ene na enye se sabri and say reintroduce tribunal no and say even ye court no kra ye what say here the engineer resource court no ena ye di tribunal ba be kan ye dia tumu ye ba be ti wo madan ye ba be personnel ye ba be accountant ye be registrar ye be tribunal chairmen and women ye ba be because you sika kakra e wo ho no na nka say ye universities one more year science one more laboratory secondary school community laboratory it is your sika immediately at time for ama tribunal for other than emphasize sika no enco educational sector enco health sector enco construction yen road drive every motorway say o call pram ana dowenya ana o call akosomo enye yeni sika ntimi ntua contractors ka ye kwa fast sika we now, I said because NDC campaign, Yura President John Mahama promise. It that promise, I want to vote to a loan, Emma NDC. It is Oma Badia on very pay loan, with the reintroduction of tribunal and classroom. A hodie na enkoye kra. Nunti any tribunal no ba Cynthia dia and can say this bakra nyan said ye say yen to me and sound to me and quiet no yes uncle kuku no ma yen to me and ye ye signing say aban fofo bi ba na ye NDC a won be twem na ya to sika na egu enti no me contribution is say NDC ni NPP enjoy party politics now on the Ghana airborne and whom they should one call parliament now every speaker a copy him clean and all parliament there some ye no more say on manu ye di and the na goals NDC best score I say the bound to NPP 7-0 and you know so you will see a bit media that they were Tassikana, Argentina and roads, Apro, name to me fix. Argentina in Sioma may bear now Kiminuni in Sioma, may 5 moye, into me a water bill by my year. Argentina emphasize Tassikano and go fix it. Yen second school to the near Vianidi. Argentina emphasize Cano and go travel now. Woman did this later and then I embrace the course second school. If you fix it, you might include Granum. Kran sana ya ko classes yen hwe yen student yi o secondary schools ene aye kate nti e wo sasika na nyansa e be kire ente yen pa sasika no ensietie no normal na enkoye maye no rather than ye be reintroduce idea e evoke bitter emotion bitterness I didn't say that are we not learning from our history say tribunal administer jungle justice and you know time of manana way and one thing a man for the answer is enye sabri Mahama ko born e modern say Ghana betnya asa afa into mapa efrebium this is not the time as I say you reintroduce into minority no at point majority no so a point. How do they reconcile their divergences or differences for the betterment of Mother Ghana? And no meeting to discuss. As far as I'm concerned, since the public tribunal has legality in the constitution, its reintroduction, and it doesn't matter as far as the law is concerned. What matters to me is the economic sense of the reintroduction today. If it is only for a job for the NDC boys and girls, then I'm saying it's a slap on our national conscience, and it will remain, a scar on our individual consciences until sanity prevails, and until one day someone will have the decency and common sense to consider and evaluate objective conditions on the ground before taking any action to reintroduce anything in Parliament. Okay. That is my contribution.
So people to me I can say, yen share Ebrana tribunal no aye asrafo abrimuno so no se bi adwuma fa ye. Tribunal system still na no your constitution da so wom. Into obekasa constitution no obi amu so into constitution ne hyehyɛ na ye de adwuma. Ye fa toto wo se saa bre no se do mo de ye adwuma ene ya ye de kabimamika bi eye adwuma no ya de pe ade kro anaso se edi tribunal na da so no obi betumi aka se enu nti ene ye de ba na nye justification bi wo ho se betumi aka se edi ni nti de ye biribi abesi nkonti ense se ye de ba wadwen kire
yo enya edin tribunal no because already your family tribunal obi nkasanti a family tribunal da your land title tribunal obi nkasanti land title tribunal your tribunal Traj yeah ka say once upon a time na nkasa trad na nkasa na a form of a tribunal because enya edin tribunal no enya edin tribunal no but this particular public tribunal ruling to be by a bit wo ewo oman we no eno na nkofo aman for katatia yen se be tapra se woma na 1981 yen wo na wo me ministers ni deputy ministers ni for ni eyina womo enimia akoso wo yen history na yen kan history bi nim ya yen history explain so that it is not a word tribunal per se, but rather the practice of the tribunal, the direction of the tribunal, the schematic approach of the tribunal, and the way and manner one administer justice, yen camera or tribunal or. That tribunal ya rolling by and camera or so that and I make I say a vocal bitterness of the past. It is a family tribunal. Nobody has ever complained say we should scrap the public tribunal. In fact, and for that is why I take a 125 to I can't say ya practicing such system ni jury trial assessor system no was introduced in this country as far back as 1843 and a colonial government introduced jury and assessor system in this country. We are not saying say man na mum tribunal na omanpanyi that role is they buy no eno na ye kasetia na mum sa that tribunal no okay article 125 clause 1A the regional tribunal is there. It will be in Kasantia and think we should let sleeping dogs lie for now. Say that CPI Benya Sika and then now collective wisdom. Say that tribunal na one more passe jungle justice, 1 year ambushed justice. Na Ancambra no, and yes, that tribunal no na ye review. Tribunal ye review no, a tribunal the common sense and ambra and the be juma. Na ye tribunal la.
Na bet it's nkofo. Na anu bi ni yaba be ye isa so share the composition of tribunal here. Chairman no, ebe obi a e fa say regional tribunal no obi obi high court. The qualification and I say this is Susudi Adretum de Gina so de akokoyere lawyer ni a obetumi aye high court judge na se ba district nso a e bi lawyer ni ono so ebetumi aka so ba circuit court judge enti anya hwe kora no mo ya lawyer fo enimu mmara ansa nipa mienu so abeka no ho do motumi aye wo de toto dada no ho a e sa na net ye nsunsun na enadie ene dada ni mu
minia senka ye wo man a kind of cray near the Unia. And away and yet national issue. No, NDC 4-year campaign, NPP 4-year campaign, not almost cartel, one more bar, 10 year bay, 10 year bay, not one more year, and no night or minor. Me, NDC, my penny, the campaign or can't say. In research agenda into unbetter judicial. Harming. Now, mum, say, be a lawyer. Now, me name say, you are appointed Chief Justice as a third seniority. Now, Uncle Fat Senior, ni akofa gini aye ne meka say dia eno nse me wa nia reset agenda no yes but my common sense and legal training and a legal tradition you know actually me say the chief justice yemfa no the most senior and fendi kind na say fi yenya atem body bi enka on ho dia na on firm na chief justice the on pattern so na ya bypass na call the next person and I'm just support the removal of Tokonu on grounds of principle. That is, how objectively I assess the situation. Objectively, Cipriano, my assessment of the reintroduction of the public tribunal, whether a regional tribunal or not, is this. One, there is no need for reintroduction of regional tribunal because regional tribunal is written in the Constitution, Article 125, Article 126, Clause 1A. The regional tribunal is mentioned. So any call for reintroduction is out of the question. There's no need to reintroduce anything because it's already there. The amendment of the community tribunal, second court, that led to their scrapping, didn't mean say they cannot be reintroduced. The parliament at that time had every authority to consider amendments and amending it. This current parliament also has the power to bring it back. Demutodo CBNU, but the NDC will say, so as I say a debana, you say you are taking more, as I say a debana, you say you seek at same one, as I say a debana, you say in schools, you say in roads, you say in hospitals, you say in way, you say in way, so I say the man say the
okay.
And to say about Nanya Midibe Chato. I won't be Sammy by Mekan. And Ramite Yura, President Mahama. Or say, second term, out of the question.
Yeah.
Now, Nya speculation. Now, Mom, so be the court Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court. If the thing is plain, like the president said, say the 2-year term, the 2-term. 4 years no. A plain it defies question now. Why does anyone take the issue to the Supreme Court? And I can predict that will be the Adequate Supreme Court, knowing the all too predictable nature of our current Supreme Court. One more better say, and yes, I'm constitution. So there's no need. It is President Mahama. I very sincere about what he said yesterday. All he should have said was plain. It doesn't require any interpretation. It doesn't require any Supreme Court intervention. On no president, what kind of say as a president that was some pim people from Mukwaya Mukwaba. That's all. So this invitation and urge, on a faceless entity to take the matter to the Supreme Court for a possible interpretation begs the question. It is one way of the president insulting the common sense of the average Ghanaian. But in the whole Mumbo de rule, president say 2-year term aso Uncle Bill no need for any Supreme Court.
Yademra and Yajuma and a Mampenia or Layani.
Supreme Court.
Okay, yeah, a plane and now Obin Super or test and Maraneshe. Constitution Obin Super test. And so the penny test and no more am I judicial system no as I said the more now same be Basano a boy
Supreme Court near Omuni Manson Robert Stamp no yeah
na then the chess of Robert Stamp son watching you and so
Supreme Court counsels ancestors 7 times Supreme Court bounces ancestor 5-0. Supreme Court bounces Assemblity 1-0. Supreme Court bounces, and see, that is what I meant by all too predictable, unanimous Supreme Court. This issue, will be placed before the Supreme Court. The judges will confront the issue, but the likely outcome is they will rubber stamp it and say that and yes, I contract. At the end, they say birth certificate here. And yeah, Supreme Court na. Commander in a birth certificate here. So if you name your Supreme Court and send your name, you're more and such as so. And for me, the president did a human job yesterday when he said, look, my legacy is to leave a good name. Then I'm making that Bimpa Iye say Ahunya. And the president Nankata, I recognize, no, I appreciate it. The legacy of Beja, and your legacy, Ubia Bonide, Kwame Nkrumah, Jonathan Mills, even Nanado. Nanado, I'm criticizing every day, no grano. Nanado, made it quite plain. Say Ghana, Abeye, shining light for Africa. Yen the campo, yen the rest of Africa. How to play politics. And say or no, ne term no so or Hanover. He did not interfere when the deputy Baumia made a concession speech, and then we moved on. So the president, I can say, speculation, and he has put it, beyond the adventure. The matter, the chapter should close.
Okay.
More, the president is Obia on top of the Panonga, and yet making now, we Nagana Poina and we say, President, no,
you lawyer, don't pay me, that's incredibly. Me don't pay, me that's a papa, and I don't pay. Any woman, your net lawyer, Koku and Sassari. You can't Ghana Law School, no, a penny or dano, watch your hopper, watch the agency, pa. Last in Bissau, so watch Emra, I think about 40 years or so. Now, and yes, I'm going to talk, I think so for 41, something like that. Or no, so I drink. Yeah, no one knows so I can send my
my
respect. Genius, so I can so NPP communication team, understand yet. Upos back on po here,
Defense and Intelligence Committee Secretary.
Okay. Defense and Intelligence Committee Secretary Edema NPP.
Ute me respected senior. Nyama mienu na me in summary. The decline that the introduction not yet legal. It's not even reintroduction because our constitution anymore that. Until we quite so there. There's nothing wrong. But on because of the economic realities of their way the Babancho Senka, my and Sabri. So those are the two things I heard from him. It's important that we go back, and I was saying, there's a lot of who hear around this tribunal conversation here, PNDC Law 24 in 1982. I cover a public tribunal by as the respected senior was saying. Ubusa question be which I think is very important to say Emrano senior yehuni neno and need the lived experience or more course our tribunal sana bayana. And I think we can only speak to Emrano senior is been released. I've had time to read the bill. Minimum Sesaya on my and so I don't know how the final one will look like. But I've read the bill. And I can tell you, and I'm going to go through that again. Omomoko through this 82 to 92 experience. No, yeah, I didn't go through it. But means now in delegitimize obia. Said Yosusu say that court nina ye and on Ghana for any. We've read the history. I think that even the memorandum acknowledges said there were excesses of those tribunals. I think that if the minority evokes those emotions and I say, Omokofasa, senior Natemano, Nisenia man for who any abuses of that quarter, it's an emotional grab. Senior Sebio, Senior Moya and Ano Nasano Mobeye, Sebio Mubu man for there were excesses. I think it's an emotional grab, which in many parts I think say it will be unfair to the law. Senior Emrano Yede Mrana to permit me to go through some element of the bill as is available.
Okay.
The Section 3 establishes what they call the guiding principles. And I say, Trimupobe na bechichire court no. Nyama 1, 2, 3, 4. Nyama 9 ne kan wasem. Dedi kan fairness. There talks to me a transparency. There talks to me a expedition, and then it talks about efficiency. So kwa many abefa so apepe ne sa court no mun sem beda ho fine to extent it actually allows. It says that regional tribunal processes may be televised. Depending on the nature of the public interest, the court, the bill specifically says it may be televised. But of course, the judiciary and farm ran to permit for something to be televised. But I think the bigger point for me, the rules of evidence and procedure, because in Pembreka tribunal, Nipa Mebresu say tribunal no enfamra kwan so nebu aten naten ya atenchia naten no nya aten because endimra so nti uko ha de obi a pe bia no akacho. I think say if you look at section 28 and 25 of the bill, 25 says that the procedure shall be in accordance with the procedure of the criminal offences. Inti a procedure be different from the criminal process as is now. So that's also important to put. The only exception I have is Oko 28 or say evidence. No, quite fast I evidence and I attain who dance here no. A bet said the TSCI no evidence decree and evidence act no. Except to the necessary modifications. And I think that that's very important. Necessary modifications mean the explanation of what that necessary modifications are. And I think that if it goes into the law as that, then it may be say not to me the chairman and OB to sort of vary the rules of evidence, which can be very problematic. One good thing you see, particularly in the mining related cases, and I'll come to the jurisdiction. Say, for example, there's a long process, but this law allows you can serve people electronically. It is your WhatsApp number, you bet me that say no WhatsApp, and it's deemed valid in the spirit of expedition. But what's the jurisdiction of the court? Courts no, ni 2 minutes they who has no Becca. There are a couple of things, and narcotic, cocaine, no related matters. That's number one. It talks about income tax, to the tax, net tax related issues. There talks about customs and related issues. There talks about minerals and mining act, galamsey. The galamsey related issues. It talks about economic fraud and loss, yoko maisika and those related shit. I think that there is something that it says offenses against the state and public interest, which I think again, if that language went into the final bill, that is where sometimes minority know what questions, because this can become a grab for against anybody. We saw the previous government do treason against people. We all knew some of those allegations shouldn't be entertained in any court. Yeah. But politicians use the court system to prosecute political opponents and enemies. So sometimes if you see things like this, the question is to what extent and being legitimate and rightful process and find it in a timeful, and I said the political enemies, which are very legitimate questions. And that this process seems to subject it to the judiciary. First, public tribunals, but say there's a right of appeal to court of appeal, so-called regional tribunal. There's a right of appeal in the normal judiciary system, which in my view, I think it integrates, and I said this tribunal system become court in its frame, and in that sense I think it's a good thing. Let me just round up. I think that the bigger question, which my senior says, Jesus say emra way, which is legal and legitimate. I want bramu obia intimi nkase the emra na banuti amra na fom mra na anything. The question is the wisdom of it. Sebi who ya say ye ni sabre ya na, which my respected senior said onu on susu ni sa. Eja ohia nyama mienu comes in the argument for the entire majority susu say it's important. Ye dikan operation recover all loot. Ye nyina ye kan ho asem the level of at least the perception of corruption. And the kwa first some the normal judicial process. To me personally, I filed a writ against somebody in 2024 April. 2 years now. The case it's still crawling. Right. Every lawyer knows that the typical judiciary process, the wheels of justice grind slowly.
But they slow though.
No question me say it can be frustrating for people seeking justice. Open you be okoma I'm one of the lawyers I said working in his team. He's been banking crisis, Mr. Amabe, banking crisis after everything. Went through Yoko for almost 2-3 years. When the cases were filed, he's been subject to the same ordeal. 14th August. It's 9 years, 2017, since the banks were closed. The cases are still in court without resolve. For 9 years, somebody has been subject to the weight of the state against them without resolve. 9 years. Of course, not the entire court process, but through Yoko and all. 9 years. 9. All the opportunities, all his business, everything, the cost of being subject to a criminal process warrants sebi what the current system needs to change somehow. And that's why I disagree with my senior. To say the weight, baby, a judiciary knew here, and the failure of justice, what it represents for our democracy, the inefficiencies must be resolved. And we are resolving inefficiencies now. It's only a matter of time. For them because even now, right? And it portends real threat to our democracy. The question, however, is does the tribunal solve that problem? Does the tribunal solve the inefficiencies problem? In part, it seems to suggest a solve it. But the point is, in my view, I don't have any opposition as is to the law on paper as I've seen it. The reality is that if you start to say the year Juma, there are real issues that become this process is subject to the other judiciary. So, in Kamia say a court, I want who to me say there is another forum, including the Supreme Court, which can set whether the law is unconstitutional or the practices subject to appeal. But Mr. Su said the bigger reason of efficiency and the bigger reason say yabema a court are effective no. If this is an attempt to solve that problem, I think say any attempt to solve that problem is welcome. Okay. As to whether or not it will solve it in practice, a different question. Yet to see.
Me that's Kwesi. When I'm raising issues, meaning on your friend Madu. Sorry, they didn't command pay. I'm an himself, so who go be Elsa Tribuna Muna. It did who cry at Uncofoso. The sense of Bibia Bessin Consa Tribuna, Soja for Abresono. Near my year, there were excesses. Yama be required to dan kuyi kura. Your democratic dispensation, and yes, be at Sarafu the dear Suntino, obey before complain be any Babayaha. Yet the constitution a year de Mara and a Babayajuma. Sat at the tribunal. And she shall be a Juma, and in print tribunal, she shall be a Jumano. Moon say a pay, and Nuntine be a Moses say M1, and I said. The mafufu bi so sa won chen ya wogi di se enoka ho bi se bi no mu ka se se bibia ni hu sam a omo kwansa man kodan titi hu sa chi Yetie yesi akromfo me mo kro no me nwane. Nti bia boni bia de pedi esi nti no mususu se bia eba se eba ne sa nkrofo ba che wo mo eden pa na ha gire.
Jami dase anopedia me fa konya so na me chia me nuano ma ye di nkomo yi. Senior senior ansasa kai na. The conversation is not about the constitutionality or legality of Embrana Yedebano. That is not about that's not the conversation. Minjini say minority for na can be say Embrana Yedebano illegal. And I say Embrana Yedebano unconstitutional. And I make kind TUC for so press statement, you know. Me hun baby I say or more kasa say unconstitutional na illegal. I mean, your constitution is clear. Regional tribunal is mentioned in our constitution. That is not the conversation. In fact, Parliament so home quite crass or more establish other lower courts. And in 2002, Parliament amended Court Act and Act 602 or more the circuit court and a district court in the idea by. Parliament will home quite say or mutimi establish courts, they have that authority, and that is not the conversation I can say. But the other concerns are Ghana for TUC minority forces who say what the tendency say a be higher democracy now the edikan tribunal in Sensemia senior council senior so kan you know and then na sha say a Dutch government now and then the Ghana sometime in 1872 omode establish a Supreme Court near the idea na Supreme Court no celebrate 150 years near the idea back down after independence yenya the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council omo na edi kan started say omo pese omo introduce say public tribunal senior the idea na eja meba after independence in sensem no tama in 1981 PNDC for a year coup omobeje aban na omo disbanded political parties opposition members 492 of them a year in Yoma Bebrebe, you know. Rollins Kasembi, with your permission, I'll just read briefly. And I'm quoting from the Human Rights Watch, where publication on the establishment of the tribunal system. And Oma quote Rollins, so in quote, Oma say, in Rollins' first speech following the 31st December coup, he declared to Ghanaians that, and I quote, in this society, there is no justice. And as long as there is no justice, I would say that there shall be no peace. So the purpose President Rawlings at the time, at the tribunals nearby, was at the justice member. And that is also the purpose of the court system. Say court system no, be provided for justice. Now, or establishing tribunals, no, then you hear. Senama Kanye opposition for 492. History chair say ye buwa binim. History chair say natural justice cry anye juma. Chair say so be tie nipa now udi na asem na anye juma. History so chair say that tribunal system when they were focused on social justice rather than rule of law. Not chair say kebi mamin kebi say yes subject to the constitution at the time near the idea that time card dey cool about constitution ni ho but just what I say and this an your money near bia no tribunals no e dey oyaw e bre Ghana for tribunals no e dey a lot of excesses na council so kan the memorandum of the constitution acknowledge say tribunal system na PNDC system e dey excesses p e bae enti eja the conversation this morning, me bana mitie minua. Epese say tribunal ne kra ne court system no the same. Na tribunal court system ne kra no etimi ye judge and jury. Inti se tribunal ne so ba and also no ebeye you know something similar. But from their council akawa no clearly no jurisdictional issues ebeba. Jurisdictional conflict, ABC. Jurisdictional conflict in the sense that tribunal, no, what is the purpose of it? Yes, a team brabia every student of interpretation will tell you say embrano is to cure a certain mischief. Eye bibi nti ne ye hyehyɛ embrano. Bibi boni a ekoso society mu nti na wo se ye hyehyɛ embra ne ye de so ano is to cure a mischief. Yem bisa you say what mischief is sa tribunal bill yi eba be solve. They've made the case for speedy trials. Eja o hwe your current court system na and there was specialized courts. Mo no more specialize assemble ko mienu miensa pe no mudi. O hwe oral in same year enya yini me yanka oral ho asem. But enya yini say chema won't me original specialized court. Ye wie na asem ni two cases e work court Samarboy ne town on prosecution akulusi. In fact Samarboy case ne cry the trial about to an end. Town on prosecution akulusi ni case. O hwe sky train in same year prosecution akulusi o mo case. Okay, other cases in the course of Ninia, ebinim kaya day-to-day trials, Monday to Thursday. But just what you say, anti-speedy trials in the specialized court, you know, attended to so speedy trials. Yeah, come once we can make the argument say, and yeah, exhaustive. I agree, but yeah, can't same way near no near who says our speedy trials, the specialized court in India, it comes with resources. That is why the minority is saying, the judiciary is the least funded arm of government in this country. Open arm of government, our budget, sir. Comparing the executive, the legislature to the judiciary no budget what from cry. Inti say ye per se, ye solve speedy trial, ye this speedy trials, but ye solve delayed trials near the idea. The minority is proposing, say, instead of establishing a new architecture, and then the current court system no ever competing, no. I didn't think I have resources and strengthen the current architecture. You didn't pump pisika any resources ain't good the current court system. Now you have more judges a Juma. Now you see more courthouses. Now current judicial system there no. Just imagine say high court complex across the 16 regions. It be baby. I'm not sure we'll be talking about delayed trials. But just what I can say because and then the existing 10 regions now. I think say every region be on a high court. But pressure at what high court in so I'll give you an example. Ashanti region, high court Ashanti region. Pressure at what high court Ashanti region so na sem ketua. Because court dine ankasa tete dine. Court dine here dine a predating 1992 tete dine. It will help court rooms near the idea na cry now to me say dine no cry dada. Enti si yesi ye ba set up new system adentina ye find resources more high courts, more court of appeals across the regions. Now you strengthen the existing system. Into minority in the case they say sa tribunals one at the Krontia edem rane ba no there's already a solution to it. Council san educate can the jurisdiction of the regional tribunals, so more be solve economic matters. Council will agree with me say no court complex no you was specialized court financial and economic matters so na you consem ni akọ. There's a specialized court for it. So a specialized court no awari sem nko asase sem nko chieftaincy sem nko a specialized court for economic and financial matters and nko you consem eno mutie wo honom. Again yes, your tribunal ne be tax in sensem near the current court system has jurisdiction to hear tax matters, tax fraud near the tax evasion near nyoma say untia o near the current court system has jurisdiction to hear those matters. Any the yasefim kran say you see the regional tribunals here ye dey what the jurisdiction to hear say offum or minor. That is if you breach provisions of Act 29. But just what I say, and now commit criminal offense. The largest ambit of criminal trial, and they say wafum or minor, which means that the regional tribunal is going to have jurisdiction to entertain every criminal matter.
Basically,
for instance, say because will be a publishing false news, say a criminal matter. The regional tribunal is going to have jurisdiction to hear such matters. You can say criminal matter bia regional tribunal, and that is the job of the existing courts. That is the job of the existing courts. And the minority concern number 3 or more raising is say if in Brandon say regional tribunal no betimate criminal matter bia, then it means say you young crofo or mote the criminal justice and criminal procedure na say Omayoko law school a criminal procedure, law student, lawyer be at criminal procedure. But the composition of regional tribunal, now you say being a lawyer, say now the Dibre any high court judge about 12 years at the bar or more never qualify. However, there are 2 other members of the tribunal who are non-lawyers. Law na say they don't even know how the law operates. Law na say obisa no minority no concern say now all the rape case akwako jina the name original tribunal na because original tribunal na mayati say criminal matter be intimity. Now the akwojina the name where they ati ase all the financial and economic matter akwojina obi a onye non-lawyer onye lawyer enima. How would he appreciate the issues and even understand the criminal procedure, understand the criminal justice system, understand say criminal position of assembly element ni say into say lawyer need to establish element where and I say the person must prove the burden of proof near the idea no crime. The burden and non-lawyer no I appreciate it. Into the case of the minority is that yenjai san same way niano emma the existing court system. And let's strengthen the existing court system. Say nebe the existing court system no. Ebenya to media here.
Okay.
Another concern.
Okay.
Another concern. Almost raise about appointment and they say another composition of regional tribunal. And they say the act doesn't lay out appointment clearly, apart from the qualification. It gives grounds for impartiality. For instance, Ghana will be him say you're a politically exposed person untimi nye judgment in ye. Me amiti untimi appoint me the fact that me ye NPP ni amabet na will be him say me a politically exposed person true and true no. Ofa me judge a be raise eyebrows kaka.
But we've seen it.
But just what I say, a be raise in isolated cases, but a be raise eyebrows kaka. But in these cases Embrano entre how you bet my first uncle for Injetina, yet baby, a bit my say NPP General Secretary or your 12 years at the bar. Ye fano, uncle regional tribunal penny, no tea assemble Ashanti region. Intino, the law in its current form now, ya passing. Council, ya can in ya no more pass you. Or more pass your president, a castle be assentina be yembra. Intino some concerns we munia and then the concerns are TUC for no area you said who had the tribunal system in the past. Now head tribunal system now see a day banana. I say difference for me there because back on under soldier and we under democracy. However, there are also some similarities because under the previous tribunal no, and also say non-lawyers soldier for et meeting na obi asem to the criminal matter. Me purchase what I say. And again, eja on the point say sa tribunal we no can say court system no etie etimi judge and jury trial anti tribunal we so timi ye bia ense hwe anya asem bia na ye judge and jury trial there will be a friend of trial by indictment and no ye no by judge and jury. For instance murder and no ye the judge and jury by a case obi akowia aban sika and answer allegedly obi de nisa abo aban sika man anya judge and jury asem and we judge nko asem and even in the matter of judge and jury no, the jury does not establish matters of law because omunya lawyers. But in this case, the tribunal now yes, you conform no any non-lawyers, they will be determining matters of law.
I think there's even a bigger question of jury selection.
You understand?
In the jury process, no.
Absolutely.
Both parties agree to select.
And in this case, it's
not like that.
In this case, the government of the day, and I say Chief Justice, Chief Justice, not government, government to a large extent. But Chief Justice, independent, and they are appointed. Oh, they be, and the America so constitution actually say was so independent. I don't care. There is no even about a person independent and as one person being independent. Only option the Chief Justice has to be independent. And you know. Say Chief Justice now our power sound now. The point is that sound no the selection criteria na no and to say judge and jury are two councils never opportunities so jury we mempenasem because we could make social media post actually na adwin the theory and the philosophy about a certain matter into no ontimi the fairness of mind to establish the facts surrounding this matter because or no there or your gender bias towards women and not towards men in the same way ni there would transfer be a tribunal no entesa council no uni hu opportunity the only opportunity obenya ne say so wa dance say nipa na obetena asem no so be exhibit bias towards you there just like you have it under the regular court system ultimately the court judge we no o pese no see ye ne nyama ontimi nya pepepe eno de ubetimi de akọ inteja insema ye ka ho asem nia no concerns when I think say a valid concerns TUC a raising senior lawyers a raising minority a raising even some members of the majority clear a raising similar concerns. It's incumbent upon parliament and committee mashishembrano to make it more clearer and to distinguish between the current court system and the tribunal. Send your beya minority in fundamental point and it's a tribunal in creative parallel legal architecture as the court system. Say and then assembly ba yetimi do kojina regional tribunal yetimi do kojina court and my yen criticize parallel system because a recipe for
next say tribunal no yen ka say ono nadwuma ne so peja asota
sa pepe
nadwuma no
who say na council can say oko and current court architecture na your family tribunal your land tribunal in the say bi ambra we omode be omoka so ye de ba be ye anti galamsey tribunal say no you chill for galamsey offense you do ha. I don't think anybody will have a problem with it. But say tribunal no benya to me say assembly a court ni betimetie no onu nso betimetie ni there. I think say that it is a major challenge and it is also creating a parallel system. Any other in any case can offer Jacob na asema make in say sa tribunal system ye kan wan asem at this material point in time. Is that what our judicial system needs? That is my concern. Sir, at this point in time, I cast a speedy trial, filing, they say, Krano, even though say, I recognize the admissibility of electronic evidence, Krano. Sometimes Krano say, Obi Krapa say, cross-examine on Skype and now Zoom, Krano. It's a challenge with the current court system because Rebecca also Zoom equipment in another court you use into adjournment, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you maybe adjournment and your man light off. Near the idea, you're frustrating. And these are realities. And you know, I didn't know tribunal nisika ye de babe setting up. They just send a medical account. I've made a point. You know, you found service are inefficiencies of the prevailing court system. They say
they say no. Honey, na no camp upon to find say sikasam.
Yeah, basically.
Sumpe na mo no. Honama sikasam. Sikasam one. And sana so no be na juma fa no so.
Jurisdiction.
I don't so can
the jurisdiction because once even the current court system ne kra no. So o court you high court nearby but you how court be a bit me dey was makwa you bit maka cho say court we kra ne bia only jurisdiction to entertain the matter mpacho so what you say and then finally as I land the intendment mema dream is misusu say denti a constitution is the shame say benya regional tribunal and say send be justice can be decentralized justice be called the various regions. But say no, justice no, what the various regions. Region be our high court. Me patcho so what you say, regional tribunal na nanka ma dwimu na bia famous of the constitution per se Supreme Court no one crime. Me patcho so what you say Supreme Court ni e baako, High Court e baako, Court of Appeal e baako. Na mom so mo benya omon krabata bebre a, omo betime di aboa ma justice akoso a se ne be ya e bia se owo ho na say obi sisi wo person oje wasase a onfa asem ne mba Accra High Court na wo benya ko High Court etie wasem na I think say yeah democracy ne yeah judicial system ne develop say sa regions ni ano is say omuni omo High Court omudi asem intino the regional tribunal no e dey important na regional tribunal ne ba be ye ene Jacob na enye say obi suro bibi and say obi in any case say susu obi for my nisika. So existing court no any nipa ni be so the person doesn't need say obey through regional tribunal be say regional tribunal be na eba be ye bibia and say except say be a regional tribunal ni ba be ye bibia ye nim but say yesusu say obi afọ mine sika obi aye boni bi eti o mine na the existing court systems no e wo ho say na tem akule yesusu say afọ mine sika na existing court system ni dey na asem anameboa under this current dispensation amount for yesusu say Oma for mine sika no aye omo the right to innocence and your existing court system ni dey o myself into what exactly as the main intention, and I say the main purpose in Tia, you should say the existing court system, no, ain't mean ya, regional tribunal. Finally, with your permission, I think say one of the major reasons in Tia man for so are you uncomfortable with the regional tribunal? The minorities uncomfortable. And they say PNDC 4, I say in 1981, and on the public tribunals nearby 82, or the public tribunals nearby yes excesses now. Again, say NDC. If you PNDC, Chairman Rollins, son the founder of the NDC. And you know, among four, I hypersensitive. Say, is it the case? Say because the public tribunal nearby under PNDC, you know. And what the tendencies and net tribunals know what the tendencies of PNDC for a yinana. And then one of the major sentiments.
Come to me, you sue said the soldier for amemu yom niamano. To be the baby wura kabi isi musabi.
The tendencies.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Say tendencies.
Okay.
But that's what the American say. A apprehension among for was say they say PNDC for year, they say NDC for year, and the democratic government. Mo be polish dia na mo ye no public tribunals ni mo aba be ye ni sese ana. Inti na ye concern I think say among for media as I conclude I don't think say one the public tribunal no necessary at this time. Number two, I think say it's a waste of public resources. I think say number three, I think say if I buy was called the public tribunals and I say regional tribunals or invest says can into the existing court system. Not find strengthening. Number four, I think say the appointment of persons onto the regional tribunal no, problematic. You cannot appoint non-lawyers to be adjudicating matters of criminal nature. And yeah, number five, even the procedural procedure regional tribunal never fast so crown. I think say and also a bit problematic and share that in some way a recipe for disaster.
Okay, that's it. Well, doctor, now come so can be 1 minute, 2 minutes. Be now, you quite a topic and so.
I just say, I'm saying, I chance and you say, topic we know. I'm say, here attention. And Mestre say, when America crana, yet me,
okay, more bits my bay numbi.
Mate. I'm say, Mathieu Kwesi Wakasa. But sometimes the question I have, me busa me who say, you see, Kwesi a very nice, fine gentleman. I mean, him say, Oshia dear pa. But Oshia NPP at there, Okasa different. Because you're canning no, I say, Obusa questions. Questions no Obusa niso nyina our answers. Our name say answers no clearly stated in the bill. One of the questions I Kwesi busa ne say no yebeba kofa party executives no ba betena so as members. Meanwhile, within the bill no, ya state wa hanomo. Ukan sa the we na di anim na summary na o ma ansa na o call the main we content of the bill now. Ya say the clause further excludes me kind we I think say V we hear the front pages and I say first initial pages now the 5 no the clause 8 provides qualification for members of the regional and okay down now say the clause further excludes the appointment of a certain member of parliament or a person who holds any political way. Enti yedi kan ya Canada. Wa kan onimansa no but unse Ghana for no bebrenya adaje kan enti or the beto sa na akoyete say ade ne kra no say etimi the NPP and NDC chairman bi betena so and say but enyesa the bill is explicit wa categorizing nipa ebitimi use omo na ade ba kon ya me ya ne say you see I respect lawyers a lot and I know say you can't nkofo a omunim de omuka ho but say a lawyer kasana bibia o make the assumption say one call law school wa bon a very insulting because yete ha no so be enye lawyer no nche say be onim nyansa because say o say oh and matters of law and on ti we yase no on ti we yase the question I want to ask myself and say are we saying say ye kofa obi a odokoko fuo na de na ba betena ho no mo ye kwakofa obi a sebi ono ni wiase nyina wotu banchia na de na ba betena so as a member of the committee. I will saying say in our normal system no yentimi nya obi a ontena classroom wasua amefa say wasua law agi degree anase oye LLB anase whatever na on for me part inti sa statement within the constitution say justice emanates from the people. No, people being lawyers in Kwan. Necessarily, say come say no no. Justice emanates from lawyers. Then they who say, oh, and the lawyer pen a bit me amount justice. Yeah, and I think say that one we all don't accept it. Say because he call way below the belt. I know him; he can do far better. But on say then was you know atade.
So we see the party.
Was atade. I know say you can do better, but to say NPP at Adena,
okay, man, to their kind.
Okay. And or can be about the tribunal system now. I think say we have to understand this. Say they are not competing because Oshe Yemra Yewo Mainima Yebeka Chero say the judicial shall be made up of the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, the High Court, and regional tribunals, and such lower courts and tribunals as Parliament may establish, and shall have the Chief Justice as a head. Or say, your High Court there, you hear a, then your High Court there, how the appeals court here. Na say no mun na compete ana
appeal dey my because how na ngi to the corner my asan kokosho.
Enti omo ba na omo be establish circuit and magistrate court omo so compete with high court. I mean, this is not here or there. Ya say you hear some different type of court normal handle issues e wo minimum. The constitution has stated it clearly. And okache me say ya tro high court and ya tro tribunal be compete with high court, and there are high courts everywhere. But there are high courts everywhere. So why magistrate court? Why circuit court? Why all the other courts? And there's someone also compete. The idea of tribunal say will be conceived say a PNDC and now what transmogrify into an NDC, and so because of that in NTB and I buy you won't say the soldier buy maybe a juma. You buy ya mampanyama and near for $4 abba from ya. Even your oncophobia at that time, President Kufuor time, they went ahead to reduce prices of goods just to make the government look good. You nim our man, you must NPP for baby and omu didjani ade to near maso so that they can say President Kufuor bresu near mama yedi. The same people are still in trade and businesses omanpenyima dollar bar from economic situation cost omunti omunia maso kra omuso omunti no also omanpenya ko round the show be ma say kalebule ni near ekoso. This is not something that you should bring even into our discussion. Say, oh, 82, soldier buying time, no, a bad this time. Yeah, buy a soldier buy ja. And he found who say, or Mampenny John Dramani Mahama buy a constitution now, or the Ibu or mine, or the soldier buying near maybe Ashim. Oh dear, mommy one example say, I deal with, or the soldier buying near man, yeah. Soldier by name constitution behind your jumana. The Omo can obey before complain, obey before complain. This time round, we are using the constitution, and the bill has stated everything clearly. Yeah, check from crank to crank. Actually be also and I think say you come back with that narrative now. Soldier buying for now, Omo transmogrify and Omo be NDC and blah 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 blah. I don't know to about my money and fact 2 million by force. Now ya ma medimo so na se be come on my house, se be yam then can you buy you want to me care for in court. At the end of the day, by this time you care jail in that because perception accounts a lot. But we felt say we need to follow due process. As you say, I no call to the point say you be announcing the judgment crowd with me say you delay judgment and you man time which the court also permits a part of the process.
Okay. Just
2 points quickly.
Wadaroma.
Mr. Su said, I think the question and what I've heard, there's actually real risk that this law can become problematic. My obia assume say the minority, the more kind of legitimate. I think there is real legitimacy to the risk. However, then the risk is important, particularly because we are talking about people's civil liberties. Say ABI, a crime or be betting akoda ho afiase. So there's real concerns. But for me, if there are 3,360 new cases backlog per year, 3,000, that's according to the report, 3,360 case backlog per year. In the Afibia no case I beka home, not near the order down. The beka home no. Again, justice may grind slowly, but you know, justice delayed is justice denied as well. So the bigger question as to finding a way to solve it, is real. My view, a 3-member panel charged by somebody of qualification, as a high court judge and as a circuit court judge, with 2 other people, subject to judicial counsel and with the right of appeal into the normal judiciary system, in my view, is defensible. Sebi, on paper, it looks like it can solve the problems of the backlog and is defensible in a way that it sees some of the risk now. Quite. My bigger question, which is why I'm ending this, if as to whether implementation will not be political like we do many things in this country, if it will be implemented with honesty, candor, and respect for people's right and fairness, then I think that the risk may not materialize. But NPP, NDC, politics, then the real risk of the law would be seen. But I think that we can't disregard exactly what the minorities say because there are real concerns. But I think that the architecture of the law, as I've seen it, seems while solving the real problem of the backlogs. As to whether or not implementation will be different, it's a different, and I think that's the real conversation.
Your first answer is young consent for Frosuna. Over the week, in some Bakubi means a BPM, send round minority press conference. And Momo can say, Ureya is a jelly nino. Minority force or more ash I catch Rabani say one shena say other try a bio who be opposed and from piano when shena winyai. These concerns are raising Mr. Mirakrabaji dear Bemu Mami a rain so no 1 year a Bemu and who some samples. Quasi you can receive freedom of speech. See a freedom of speech. If he and a copy of him, and I send the freedom of speech until a course, copy will be a selfie when Nick and she to be I say, if it's like a Sahadi, a pim, ye need be sir. Not young shares are 3 a course, I say when you are bringing more can once a winnow. Mammy to base medu.
A Jacob na Midasi Bebre. Inti the miracles the leading India a bit you canning in a mean boom. America, the miracle, they can't the between the running their cry. I ran dear no, the decline NPP, and I said me personally. Obi no endorse hate speech, and I say violent speech. Nobody endorses it. Say Abia, Obi Beka, Sambia, and was all come. Obi no endorses idea. Number 2, the position of NPP is not say so be boom raswa and my young coaching pakrono and then my investigating pakrono and then my young prosecuting pakrono. The position of NPP is say enfani pakrono and fambra kwanso. Lady Asemi then I see. Yes, lady na kokan sembi. Na nsem na lady no kokan eni ntino. Police for kocheno. On 7th July, according to police statement, we release it on 7th July. On 7th July, and then police feel secure on a conviction on 16th July.
On her own plea.
On her own plea on 16th July. 1. It is a fact about one thing. Say lady no police for coaching no. Then the bush for crying baby lady no yadina kwa koshe. The bush for Accra police station near who baby lady na kwa koshe. Subsequently, nebusuafo hu no eno mo hu say lady no ya bona ma max aba ne hu nia oyobia was suffer violence ene ye bisa lady ne say violence na was suffer ne ba ne say and there's an audio going around that lady nankasa record the audio the to abonten say ye che na ye de ne call NIB no eno mo bo no na was sustaining sa injuries na Fast forward. Apart from the fact that 48 hours, police vote so or man access to counsel, access to family, access to bibiano. And nobody nipa lady in the court. Lady in the court. No record. The lady didn't have a lawyer. Lady no any lawyer. Lady no so no until the course of courtroom has it. And what we have been told is that the lady pleaded guilty. After lady pleaded guilty, and I am aware, say constituency, NPP constituency executive say war, Wutu Senya, arrange for lawyer, Emma leading because apparently that's the lady's constituency. Arrange for lawyer and a lawyer, and then the kokasa any idea no omo court. Into omo court and a lawyer ni pleaded with judge and say, oh, my lord, tama lady ye taking the plea, no any lawyer. Lady nonsense ma okenya no ntiase onim dia na o kana again lady na suffer injuries near there is evident on lady ne body say ya shin whilst she was in custody until the pleaded guilty ne can it's possible say she did so under duress and that she didn't voluntarily plead guilty. 1, 2 she didn't even understand and appreciate what was happening in court. Because she didn't have the right to legal counsel and legal representation. And they just, when him say, under Yembrano, say, Obi a plead guilty. Na say, plea no, enye voluntary. And I said the plea was secured under duress. And now the plea was secured under threat by law enforcement. So plea no, is recognized as a plea there bit my boy in court. Now, lady, the lawyer can catch a judge and they say, and a lawyer can catch a court and they say, lady need access to legal representation. Lady need tears into no pleading guilty. Nintin court name mahon kwine for her plea to be retaken. The court didn't agree. And now later, a man call a pregnancy test now. Yeah, the Bible and say, they are sentencing for 1 year. But you see, Jacob, now on a more serious note, if Obi Kasema, I think this government is super hypersensitive about certain things. Obi ko Kasembia, yeah, nipa na wakasem nekra. Does nipa nekra have the capacity to carry out in semna nipa nekanana? And yes, Obi ka bibia na abina ye so sensitive to the extent say abino. Asuma ni akwachi nipa no ni abonu in custody ye di nipa ne court ye man access to lawyer
yeah man access na so no ankasa na one request for one.
Oh unim say even ye mbrɛ mu ni such matters na kan say ya nipa ni lawyer kra na abai ni timi arrange lawyer man from legal aid me patro say what I say abai timi arrange lawyer man from legal aid. And in such a matter, and I've just disclosed to you, say, lady nekra ni enim baby a no she. And he said, granted without admitting, say no lawyer cry, and fan say no lawyer. Lawyer nekra to locate baby girl lady ne no. A very difficult until they didn't call court yet. And some lawyers need to me follow court process. Nene the idea ko hu baby a ye lady ne she. But before I didn't be court, now the bush and for him, obi ante ho hwe. Eja media kura ante ho hwe on the first day I did lady no court. The tia ni say lady no plead guilty a ya ba bedru baby a you do. But San American, I think say abina ye too much sensitive about some of this.
Yeah, share maybe in someone ye can. Yeah, so Onipa, does the person have the capacity to carry out the person and make there was some treason case be. Ama yachi nipa beye enai bi
Western Togoland dey now
there be agbozo no de no
police officer no
ene other people can back on the crown no yotonfo blacksmith bi ono no so ka ho ye consider say na mani nyina say enkofo ne some be treason there was one doctor bi am so no ko we free mu yem say na womu wo capacity no so betumi aye bibi ete saa ansa na ye dom court remand womu severally mpo ansa na judgment ba na say ruling ba ya agozo nya ne TDD mo ne ada one cause agozo wo tie nsama na oka nsabre ni nyina na anya de a wo mabọ pobo ne bia but ye tie nsama akọwi ase no yante hwe because that time no high profile issue pa our Ghana ha
enti
na bisa say enti say ye fa capacity no yastika eno betumi aye bibia fata say use ni sa.
You see, I'm not saying say capacity should be the yardstick, but I'm saying say sometimes it has to be considered. Ofa abozomun same year, we always say a chief are 2 senior police officers, military officers can.
A lady.
Military officer lady. In TC, the capacity to conduct a coup. Abozo, for the record, I think say court acquitted eventually.
Yeah.
But you can say capacity to conduct such a thing. I'm not even speaking in respect of Agbozo Asem because already he's been acquitted. But the Akwachi police need penny pa any soldier ni. Na see say omo plani bibisa. It gives some reasonable suspicion. Say any maybe police and military connection media maybe they can bibisa beti makos. But I'm not saying say sanity. Because nipa ni acquitted no court na acquitted no which means court na adia to me say na bibia nim Agbozo no didn't have any question to answer or whatsoever. But the point I'm making is so bit to TikTok na say nipa ne ka say ABC dia let us consider say nipa na sem no ka no say be enumdwa bi na nipa ni dwa na say nipa no the tendency so bit ma carry it out.
They don't ever have the tendency to carry out any.
But just what I say, I don't know the full factor about Oliver there now. But just what I say, But yeah, if you say nipa no wo, sir, in your money ni I say,
but to be the ABB, your videos be or why before say yeah, producer be born at appropriate time.
But I am very confident and I'm very clear in my mind. Says our TikTok lady, when you are right to legal representation at the time, can a lawyer need advice in his own pleading guilty? Number 1. Number 2, can say no full trial. Anka lady, I don't think say anka prosecution need to secure the conviction of the lady. Because lady, we have been told say or you're illiterate, sebe, or you be on school that, or you be on legal jurisprudence now say on criminal justice system now say any day na ko jina court any bisa no say udi for an adibem. And now ya born yourself into bisa and say no. And I say odi for na court and can say odi for there. So they are convicted on your own plea. Judge dey say no be. And your money 1 year say onko them. But say nyoma we ni ano. What I'm saying is say if you say nkofo afoma minor, let's afford them their constitutional right. The right to legal counsel na your constitutional right oh. The right to legal counsel, your constitutional right. It's that now bet you be a police. You need maybe I did nipa kwa na kwa kwashe. You bet you say nipa kwa ne plead guilty. Not just say nipa na watching no. Did you have the intention say oh the nipa kusie ama shabby treatment? Be send your beya nipa no in the quest of ni freedom no. Or because say ni media to move from menko court na menko jintum. I think say problematic.
It also say bro no can who be.
No, it is a factor.
Now,
that the video is established. Say a border. Then it is a factor.
Video na, and I say in some kind. Some video no ye channel man be say you video you mu. And the video no mun sama no original say me na me kind.
There be ye nchire no.
Me ba. Some video na circulate on social media no. Na enye ono no ye bisa ne say wo na some video no ye o say me a na say nye me a. And na oji tubu say me a.
Endru ho.
It's I don't know mujina so de ye no.
And Ameka said she was convicted on a whole. No say ye de court. They say what committed criminal offense near the court. First in a court ne be ye. And they say you be free case and case number so and so Republic versus Kwesibochi and Jacob now you can say publication of false news count 1 publication of false news contrary to section 204 or 207 of Act 29 guilty or not guilty. But just what the American say now I can say they are guilty no I can say not guilty maybe you be say no you can't tell if they are guilty or not guilty no or say guilty. Now the question is that we say we understand what was read to her. That is the first question.
But there was an interpretation.
That's the first question.
Guilty on what?
guilty say we publish false news and not publish false news.
What is brofo? Some sort of brofo.
I'm illiterate.
And I say,
no, said the
I've listened to the lawyer.
Before there will be an interpreter.
I've listened to the lawyer. No, as to even whether or not or the consequences of say Ojiatum so you're guilty or not you're guilty. So this is a whole legal conversation altogether. But just what they are making us. Ain't it right to legal representation? I paramount, you know. Send a lawyer no. And I'm a lawyer not actually trading. We say in court, you can say would differ a chase say never two. You can say okay say wouldn't differ so say never two options are 1 year. And then you can say nipa no. She's been subjected to the full legal scrutiny. Say never should be held accountable. I am not saying say and your court in was or you.
Because
lawyer.
BB says you court to her.
Then they see your court when they say and they standard procedure and they baby say would be for now dibem. But yeah, it's the moon say okay say would be for say never here. Okay so and your court in the lawyer.
Yeah, me educate me wa kakra. Say me call you no. Yes, what page de bi de ato baby. Ade kona be page na ntumi nka nkyere me. Say o page so ni free ade ko si ha. And o page ensan free ade ko si ha. And na o page aduane free ade ko si ha. Na wo ye we say wo mo cheche mo say we ni why my ye. Me di for na say be de bi. O kan say
charge ni e de be bo no hwe charge sheet ni so a. Count na ye be kan ya kire wo court no. So account no doesn't detail offense now are committing and case a charge a one brem say na make na you better say publication of false news contrary to section 29 of act contrary to section 207 of act 29 guilty or not guilty but you can't just say on so and so you publish on near video natural near video
but the charge the fact and then your plea
absolutely. But the charge, the fact, you know, oftentimes the council, you know, say, and yet exhaustive to what has happened. And just 1 or 2 paragraphs, say, on this day, you published a video that is contrary to the Criminal Offences Act. So, video cry fan channel. To even establish, say, oh, now video, ni man, now video, ni fan channel. And I make us say, and
Yamina Mia, some Casa Yamina Mia.
I make catch say, Nipano Crano, the consequences of plea, no, not Yasiana.
Not Yasi.
That is what we have to examine. Entina law nature say nipa no plead guilty na say enye voluntary na say say plea no of no consequence and no moment in law.
No kwesi uni me say ya de keto abi wa ha. Yenya ho kwan yenya videos bi one lawyer bi kasa de fa uraba no ho say ebra they were the lawyers omokutu charge no. It's me person ke etie de okan ye no based on that bit me aboya me yetumi e de enkomo no su ye panti prince why I ready am yenko
a lawyer for etutaji mami esre court senka ohun ni mo isan se mami o ma bi ensan ya ba ko pra di bi lenum so ono aso sign single mother nti ya sre court asenka court pra no ma on fa ne nkwa fi asenanka on fine no so nanka eno so nye na ho nsem na ho ma afufo but yeah you know try say ehwe nsem utiti nsem na ho kan ina o se sa suban na amanfo ko gina social media so edi atem eye no mabone eya no so e o gan asisi ya enti ese eya asebi ene ye nsem na ho se de be ya e fi na pro no obi a ogina social media so e kan nsem edidi atem eye bibia no obedwene ho hu se ban hwe yi na okoto adwanu mu a onso so no ye betimi a den ahwewa so ni sansa ni ntino ya sra ni esese nka o man kwan na ye on fine no na nka e man nkofi no court se sa pa ya nti onko da fiase afiba na e misdemeanor se udifwa ana se wage atu na nka ho aso twen e between 1 day to 3 years 1 day to 3 years and I guess the kind of court no na dream no o say ye man o man o paper won kwa fiase na on di on ya buy for enti ye he say ye betimi nsabe kan records of proceeding copy of the judgment me a say e ko hia say e say ye koye appeal e wo sentence no ho a as asocha court for the man ye hesitate say e be appeal court
one of the lawyers now on the encentrophobia edin common. Kwesi would see na some kind of say the kind omo pa judge ne chaw say anke be yanka on moneka na mo fa no to afie say or your single mother and the bucket one call onya 5 years.
Okay. Maybe can not say first time offender.
First time offender and nyama it's kwesi in reality you share trend social media me I'm a victim of Sanya Manitino. I know what it yes.
Then they say shema.
Yes, I'm on the swami. You share trend and MSC ko say obi a betu afa ho kwan na wafa camera desi no so na some no kan wo kwan untu me wa no kan Sanya say ko
Jacob na two things. Quick one, their lawyer and the Kyle. Their lawyer and your friend mitigation of sentence. When say senior you didn't come over table with one say now what genuine form so atum. If you say be no ni lawyer, if you born in the sign of money niano. At that point, the lawyer don't mean you bet my and say obe plead for a mitigation of sentence. If you court in the person 1 year, or 3 months, and or 2 weeks. And until now, because say or bow, you see. San your money near factors are ultimately plead say sentence no enya den embra.
We
lawyer no na on kasa about the conviction. Because conviction there's nothing you can do about it because tama lady na kasa no only lawyer ya bona no hododo no ono we can nsem that answer na lawyer be mtend don't mean kan ho he but Jacob now on the more serious question now we bisa no. What's me di kan kasa no. I totally disagree say ibia society say society be obi be fa camera didi obi atem ni ade but let's be also clear say ususu so obi didi watema your remedy is in the civil court Jacob na internet defamation wo ho no obi didi watema your remedy is in the civil court your remedy doesn't lie in the criminal justice system enti na obete ne say obi esu obi say o say waka bibia fa ne ho tama Dr. Matthew Poku prep journalist because ka say onu na ama ye twitwa cables mu Ashanti Media say den no so the ne court few days ago me hu publication cry say tama Dr. Matthew Poku prep or this media fi court na court of appeal overturning decision or something like that into obi ka say be fa ho now to say nipa ne gu ani ma say your remedy lies in a civil court it doesn't lie in a criminal court however the growing pattern say amanfo kan sem fa amanfo ho no e kan sem bia ensem fata fa amanfo ho no ensem ni bi wo ho ma I agree say criminal connotations I agree totally and then the law must take its course I agree na me kan say NPP position is to be a bonia my yen kwachi nipa kro no but yen mani nipa kro no access to the constitutional rights for instance legal representation na nipa kro defending ho I don't subscribe to those things. I don't think proper. I don't think it's proper to threaten the president's life. I don't think it's proper to threaten the vice president's life. I don't think it's proper to accuse the former vice president of murder. There's a video be accusing the former vice president Dr. Baumia of murder. Police for you money. And then say the police is even being selective in matters or prosecuting matters are unprosecuted because that case or that video. It's also on social media. I don't subscribe to it. Let's respect our leaders. Let's make sure say however, this is an unpopular opinion. However, so be a year president and a criminal offense. So be a year president and a criminal offense. Or because they said the president, I know the president attempt. No matter how morally it may be wrong and unjustified in our society, and I say your money and your cultural setting, and your criminal offense, and a court are your corner, so they are court of law. At the end of offense, not to be managed than your offense, or be the president as tema and your publication of false news. Say president news you say nipa no bunenima say what did in a tema. President in the remedy lies in the civil court. Nobody should be jailed. Say we did the president at time. And then I think wrong.
Based on atem did no na court the jail no and now say
that's a good question.
The threat on his life no and no so e dey man no sa sentence no.
Osha charging tia yigina so from their the lawyer back kind not in this video but in another video I'm sure say I have 4 PA huna lawyer ne say you convicted no or see a man, 2 charges. The first charge had to do with the Electronic and Transactions Act, say what transmitting information via any valid information, now what transmitting false information. And I know so account and the judge no bogu because district court no now only who can say obey impose the accompanying sentence for that offense and then the judge no bogu. And the second one was for the publication of false news. Publication of false news, then you publication of false news, you know, your kind. Mante, in all sincerity, Mante said the lawyer no. There was a threat of death or threat of harm.
Okay.
Unless you bet me your charge sheet, you know, and I say be in your court in the judgment, maybe near being shared, but from the lawyer naka, and then from statement in news UTV for more you know. Munya will be a can say a publication of false news. I think it's internet. Such charge in the means a council
there was this woman in always one of the states America some kind of Obama I think no 50 years or so and court threatening President Donald Trump life for KBB Trump on we jail 4 years or so.
Okay,
6 years old.
When you Trump there, but I have one from UK, Aberdeen, University worker be say NPP here. Na also mamini woni come up na senko wumo. This is the information.
Yeah. When the US, it's woman or can say or can be about the threat. I mean, so can be a far President Trump who say who sign him and you jail I think 6 or 4 years.
Okay.
US so yeah sure. A hono baby a bit like I say democracy the far by a hono omojitum say bibi sa no nche dan but omo take decision bi wo but to take question some more kan na kwai say much attention okwan ye de mamene fa so no nka say de ne fa so sa
eja kwabna
yes sir
say material kwasi kano say ninsema okan nyina no me hu dwiri mi say kwasi na kasa say say bia na ma make reference because me aya na ye mama but all the same no ye be fa ne sa de me meka ne say you see NPP on omo I trainee I will use the word me who social media these days the way are almost so-called TikTokers attack mpanimfo okrom ha especially omampani na ye boni ndua ni ye ni say na threat of life any san man you can easily see say e yade a omahye that na say yen sebi rabbit dogs na yenja omungu abonten na say okawa ye be ka tell say our license in our county any criminal offense because that is what all catcher is here say so obi catcher say omampanyi munkunu ene na yire ne mba any criminal offense because on yehwe that is what omoma yate ase but yehwe lady no issue no there has been several instances are see in the past and there are many law no you see oh this one Supreme Court has already interpreted it. Unim de ntia yomokasan because obi the assem koi and a fasa area ne ho and per the judgment omode maye no ababeye the new understanding of that part of the constitution. Eba mremu nso a omwe di aban so 8 years no enema bi omoye no omma yehu say ye ka the first gentleman of the land ye Ghana untimi ntra ba bi ankeka de ye ode. Inti ya wankofo bebre ohono ma omu make statement in our view we thought say some of them cry were more lighter than the mami and I say Rabai Kikaye. You can talk of Bulldog on a set. Or say Omampenyon really term. He wasn't even emphatic Kukuna and I say yet one ekocheno. I mean appear stadium yes so did Omampenyon term. He even came behind the scene to come and he came to apologize to the public. Ye wonkofo bebre students cry nkwara mabawa 8 omo chana SHS yes omo didi omampenya tem na asake omo. We are not talking about ordinary people. We are talking about the president of the land. Say obi say yenkuno. Obi say we defiling enkwara and you think say defilement any criminal offense for somebody to tell you say ye waha and I yetimiti say oh papa bi oni young girl bi akoda abusuafo ni say omo de omo fa nko court ba na straja na say Ghana police service akoje asem no omo de court enye sa na omo ye no. So if you tell me say omampanyi hotel kunya so oni nkwara de da, which means in itself is criminal. Say omampanyi betimi adify because that act of defilement ukomo embrem na say embrem ni ma ya trust say the sentence should range from 7 to 25 years omampanyi you finding guilty so okodem be say, and you think that the state should not be interested in it. Say yenja no send there or kind wow and I think any issue be a bit see what abonte a you better say akokra bi ni obi ada hu mame for no busa omo kra am say yenka because e fi asem ni ade nde nka Ghana police ne shrage ne sane mani nyina munjai because asem ni kra ni yen shada anye we. No, that is what we are saying. Media me gidi say obi so camera si ne so deliberate na ni da ho and na so camera. I had an issue at court. Na me ni obi nya small issue bi. And nipa no okansem bebre on a phone. When I went and I presented to my lawyer, I was saying nipa no wasn't aware of it. We can't use this. We ono na so camera ni sin so. And na oya aware say ade ameye no me wi am de beto abonten. Enti wakansem ene niema a ogidi. Ye okrom ha no mo. Ena NPP pani baako eyi abrante journalist si ho sa abrante we munya na munye ni sei ampa anche na obi ekuno. So should we sit down and expect say this young lady beka ena opanyi bewu otena so owu
no capable or sa capability no so baby be etisa
na me pese me busa eja say emrani mu no emrani me lawyers enim defo me nutia omo nkyere me ba bia law no e kire say ofumra na I say hwe capability ansa na ye de wakotuma na say ye de mra no anyway di ye hwe say o ye 10 gram enti ye ba na say oh nipa so mesi susu say sebi onu na akun we ni ahwe ne stature ni ahwe ne 10 ni ahwe ne muscles ni ahwe say oh we dey akwara ontime company enti ende ye njai no is that omutimi prove bibi sa dia and that statement no mo kan no we will go by but say yes sa dia ende de ye te he keka ni nyina no and hold water. Some people has to be made examples for others to learn. Me say utie ni audio now unhwe nwie say wa akoma yare obenya bi because aye time na all you know nim say wa abofro 5 years. See ye krom ha na mra nya adwuma na ka wo ba kra say de obesi bi atete abofra ne kra no say mra ya adwuma yi a o say ye hwe ne ye because akra no ye oman ne de anya wo ba keke say wa wo no enti say wo ba na ntete ne niema a odi akra ne famu no ebe say akra ne mana ba be ye penimbonia. You yourself as a parent, you have to also be charged because there are institutions to that. Enti unim so wo ba 5 years unim say we na wa sorry na wa fa camera si so and na wudi at I'm sure say that na ne ba ne kra no o shedem ho no mu bi na akra ne so enti very soon we wan say akra 12 years 16 years on so camera si ne so. Is that what we are supposed to entertain? Enti me de eja me 1 year ne de me feel say e wo form sir now say ko mo man no be 3 years no because the maximum say e so oba no osua nyansa because there are a lot of rabid sebi human beings are ya training on mobile system nima. They are embarking on similar agenda, especially they are not attacking anybody, just any ordinary person. No. The target is the president. Chale yanka in obibekunu and obibese. At the end of the day, the question I'm asking myself is say, who say nipa no wo ye no na wonim say bibia obeye bia no obenya so ya hwe Dr. Kase bi say ono susu say the asotwe edbema no ebe yese na ho na obi nso ankwankoye bi the lawyer no kra so ka bibi lawyer no etie no so kan say judge ne say sa anamuntu ni sa ne ye no abe 1 too many so be hu na we aso camera si no so na bra in 2024 abrante bi ana owo so utium na I think so NDC branch organizer or the camera si no so na sansa samu no ye die we minum se emraba ma hon kan be yetumi ayidi a aha
Naka yenyi ntias mo ko threaten Dampare former IGP or threaten former interior minister and I think nipa bi owie ya na ejele 4 years
sure
it's a bisa say sa yentwe na so yemfa no kwoto afiase na obi o wa chire no ehun say emi ya ye de bekoto afiase no sa de anamotu na etuye no e di 10 krofo say wo munya biu enye no kwa na pagya man krofo ye ne moyi into mami ti o ya
eja me da say eja for on a principle basis erano minim ni din and is it like me penny din hwe and on a principle basis I won't add one view to the any of the videos because so on a principle basis me hear videos so the America BIA attested on the videos because from a principle basis me hear videos having said that eja maka pay but let me start from this her conviction is on her own plea meaning I was careful to add that so court now jitum my phone so you open yourself up to the sentence the full sentence until on that sense I may not be able to and I mean to anka say attention because so jitum what forma you're open to the sentence of course if things like a suggested SMU Yabono and her right to abuse it's true there then those matters must be looked into but me person me the way general way so it didn't come a far bigger conversation because again I thought that we hero worship them we make people who we make them heroes and which is why it's intentional on a principle basis say I won't descend to the place where I make or any person a hero but I think there are legitimate conversations out of it the values of our nation and what it means for nation building and the contribution of the internet and social media on one bit civic education may I sure say it goes to near chair social studies and even a time there were things around civic duty, this civic, what is expected from Yesubai and how Miko SS St. James Seminary. I remember current head of the Bishops' Council, Most Reverend Matthew Jemfi, on Sundays would have time to talk about courtesies. And courtesies for boys and girls was a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Just to say, the question we should be asking is what civic education and a youth or sorry no pano be any TikTok na or you say na what form of education and a day na yema and then for me my interest more is on the national security part. We are forgetting that these companies are private companies, these are algorithms. In US election there were companies seek I think 2016 or so that were deemed some Russian agents could influence the election based on how they could disinformation and what they could do with social media. I think probably it's time Ghana we have a conversation around some countries are and the free access to some of the content is not available.
England,
Australia now only 16 years only access to social media. I think those are bigger conversations I always say because to say no and when say matter phone no say papa and because it's clickbaiting said you pass the same no wants the controversies so we are all making them the influencers right shock and awe inti se mitimi beka de hu pa na me beka de enim pa na me beka de maha mani pa enche I'll become the omaimuno me na obi abepe masem because me na obi abehu me. And because as a society we're training ourselves to create our own celebrity or influencers culture of people who create shock and awe, no, that's what you will get. So I think that the bigger conversation is to see and me sure say minister because say you fam ramra unya 16 unya social media Say the beba okroman one here and some no bedoso. And I say I say social media no cry no algorithm no never be or yeah money need social media for because of how we want to develop our country. Yeah me bia na say dia be show on feed in Ghana. One here the conversations that will develop, but I think that is the conversations we need to have. Civil liberties have a part. Many and say Udi president atema any crime. But for purposes of the record, let me read section 207, which is a mana yejina so a sentence around whatever her name is, right? It says any person who in any public place or any public meeting uses threatening 1, 2 abusive or 3 or insulting words or behavior with the intent to provoke a breach of the peace or whether the breach of the peace is likely to occasion shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. 3 defining words. So abusive, threatening or insulting to the extent that it has the power to breach the only president that in itself is not a crime, but if your conduct, including insulting, abusive, or threatening to any other person in a public space that can devolve into, say, Ebema Asumje Emba, and found say you're president, you are liable of a crime.
You're criminal.
Oh, it's criminal.
Okay.
That's what the law says.
Okay.
It's actually criminal. Indeed, that's what I read. The question me woman say unim maka wo fia pen me mi so ano say bi na me ho nye de ma no na me wo nti any law e siki say be si nipa no ho kwan no mi susu say target me because say bi o papa bi say say o wan hu na de anka den na obey o wi ase because say bi me insent me mbo carpenter me ntimi mbo tom me na na yotom for ba me bo bi enye yi because me hu susu me nti no there is one of the things I protect jealously, and I think everybody should have the right to speech because yes, you will be who kwaya. One here and then now you about your session or china ebeyeme. So, and I've said it openly, at the peril of the abuses of people's rights, I don't think speech should be criminalized in any form. And I'm one of the people who thinks that although 207, 208, I still am one of the people who thinks that the vestiges of 207 and 208 must be repealed. Because Misusu said, that's my view. Misusu said, yes, there must be responsible speech, but I think that there is other avenues a bit me see no quite done making it a criminal offense. But no crime said it is still in the law.
Okay.
The reasons why whereby or the bay use way, so that they can keep. But I don't think any one of us should be fragile enough for anybody to have. If you think it's defamation or you think it's abusive, you have other records. It's my personal view, maybe because of my own biases towards speech. I don't think Obi Kasabwa should be in any form or sense because of my own personal biases. But it doesn't mean say be on my no me who quite so because I want random say or threaten or abuse who did attempt to the point say it breaches the peace at watumra. So to mean say be the attempt in a way that threatens the peace and it's a criminal offense. The point is, way no, I was a cause of one brand new one. Me, imagine say for purpose of criminalizing speech, we should take it. But me, no.
Yeah.
The very fair Community Service Act, just a few days ago. Me, no, I say, man or 3. Me, I say, what could prison pay just to see what happens for a woman? It doesn't matter the nature of the crime. I think we are quick to put people in jail, custodial sentence, and I think it's something we should all try. Just go to prisons and see the nature. There are places that when they are quick, obi or prison I change, so obi that hotel or come out. So when we are speaking about those prisons, near get to the dignity of people and the dehumanizing people, omuko jail ba omo reform yo, they actually get hardened. Community Service Act just a few weeks ago, Minister President Nyan signed here, but nothing stopped the judge in particular of saying, say, me sure say you come or gata bebre wo ho. Say you didn't see gata mu bosome miensa. No, ti gata mu bosome miensa. It would have been far more punishment than putting her in jail for 1 year. And what I'm saying is,
okay.
Values, we need a national conversation around values identity in mind. And I don't think that social media is helping us. We need a broader law conversation and protecting social media in those spaces.
Okay.
The attention you know American say, although say around the casa no etomra senior city no some run na si casa boa ho no kwan no e ya ade a ye nyina e wo say ye try say be ye fi amra no mu. The attention you know American say e wo say wa form mra ne de but custodial sentence said in Nakutu jail may judge in Yadwin.
Okay.
I think say there could have been other punishment, a better deterrent about bra sebi. Because our social protection, only the social mechanism in our country. Akwa in the 1 year now, minimal jail no. How the 5 years will survive, you have no idea.
But yeah, shall be so. Yes, you'll be behind and saying na a yamaye. What soon you say, eh? When you say, dear, me cock ye. A bit with your how me. Did you also thought about Mofrano? Ah, Galano said that me, you know, Semiko Homua, me may on bed. Who saw your phone? Why do you know what it's I do know man home. I saw by a wire. I fell by no. I saw Chinabano. A woman said, me never be wise. Say, me say, me seem a victim. I mean, him some being here, Bonnie Bia. But look at the way, almost 2 weeks. Back and forth. Dimata, me, mamma, who call the baby crumb the next fry. And see, who yamisano? Have you taken into consideration some Camina Kede Yamia? I can be dana. A jamino ya, just sebi. Me started by saying some minimal running D. May share videos. I want to add one view to hers. Inti clearly, sebi wa anjing ankwechi because so when him say I want running muna you can suffer the consequence. But a Jamaican say oh here or might be no sebi Eddie Jimmy for na chichira mumai and oh here and the reason is that sebi ejuma bebre o mine mu inti ye su gata ho ye su kwaye pa ejuma man nye e free labor yeah Zoom lion no bet you be 800 cedis a month fanu kosi gata mu sa afena fanisi gata mu afe obeto gata mu afe obesia hu nyansa which is why I think Community Service Act in my view is one of the best laws this in our criminal system beyond the plea bargain. Probably this is one of the second reforms I think is extremely important. Okay.
They make and say asotwe anu de man asotwe me ka say ya hunu na mombo enje asotwe ni fi no but they make and say odi ni kotu jailer oman nu mom na ekoto aduane ama na di oman nu mom na ekopa bibi ama na hye yesa be mo no ho ka de bia ye sebi ye ni hu on deserve say ye be sa bo no ho ka
ono mo na so boy hoka
exactly it fanisi gata mu fanisi gata mu 3 years
okay
3 years no fanisi gata mu 3 years
okay
no sajel no akoda 1 year no it's not worth it until bomwa nyina gata mu 3 years next time obefa camera na obehu
you know once